Good morning. Welcome to today's presentation, The 8 Dimensions of Wellness, a holistic approach to client treatment and clinician self-care. This webinar series is made possible by a grant award from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. We are excited to provide this virtual series during the month of September, which is National Recovery Month. Today's session is being recorded and will be uploaded to the CMH YouTube channel for future reference. Please feel free to use the chat box to ask questions and add comments you have at any time throughout the webinar. And if time allows, we'll do our best to answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation. Our presenter today is Sarah Shaw. Sarah is a substance use disorder counselor and peer recovery coach with Flint Odyssey House. She specializes in holistic wellness modalities that enhance client recovery. And with that, I will turn it over to our presenter.
All right. Good morning, everybody. So thank you for allowing me to speak today, and I'm very glad to be here. The 8 Dimensions of Wellness is definitely something that I am very passionate about discussing, and is something that has really enhanced my own sense of personal well-being in my own recovery and in my daily life. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you guys. I'm having a few technical difficulties, but we can get started with this. And I do appreciate that introduction. Like Sarah was stating, I do have extensive knowledge in the holistic modalities for recovery, but I also have some experience in harm reduction and multiple pathways to recovery, which include MET. And so just a quick disclosure before we get started is that I'm by no means an expert in the 8 dimensions of wellness, but I do know that through my own lived experience in recovery and through my clinical experience working with clients on a day-to-day basis, that looking at these different areas really does help when it comes to positive outcomes and being able to help individuals utilize their treatment process in a more meaningful way. So we're going to get started. So looking at these 8 dimensions of wellness, which I'm sure some of you guys are pretty familiar with in terms of what they mean and what they encompass, they're kind of overlapping and they kind of each fall on each other in terms of like a domino effect, right? So if we're having issues in one area, we might be experiencing issues in a lot of other areas. So when we're discussing these 8 dimensions of wellness, first and foremost, we're talking about that emotional wellness, and that's coping effectively with life and creating satisfying relationships, right? And so if we're having trouble coping with ourselves, positive self-talk, anything like that, that's really impacting our emotional well-being and state, whether that's mental health issues or self-regulation, things of that nature, it's going to quite possibly impact our social dimension, our occupational dimension. They all really do overlap. So the next one is that financial dimension, and that's the satisfaction with current and future financial situations. So that's being able to look at our clients and even ourselves and say, do I have the ability to sustain myself? Do I have the ability to meet my needs financially and personally? And what barriers might be there that are preventing me from doing that? And like I said, these can all kind of impact one another. So the next one is that social dimension, and that's developing a sense of connection, belonging, and a well-developed support system. So if we're kind of closed off and isolated from others, we lack that sense of community. We lack that sense of having some kind of mentorship or someone to communicate with. That's definitely going to impact our emotional wellness, our intellectual wellness, our environmental wellness. It's all going to really, it's going to impact us in a negative sense in terms of what we're able to do and how we're able to cope with daily life challenges. So the next one that I like to talk about in more depth too is spiritual. dimension. So that's expanding our sense of purpose and meaning in our lives. And I know that some people really struggle with this one, especially people who have issue in terms of not connecting fully to a religious aspect or a spiritual component. It doesn't have to be religious or spiritual. It can be really something that just provides us with that sense of purpose, that sense of drive, something that motivates us and gives us that sense of passion. And if we're lacking that in our daily lives and we're not really focusing on that dimension, that can be impactful to us as well. So going to the next one, that's the occupational dimension. That's a sense of personal satisfaction and enrichment derived from the work that we do. And being able to identify that and ask ourselves, is what I'm doing beneficial to me? Is it helpful? Do I get a sense of fulfillment from this? Do I feel enriched? Do I feel like I'm contributing or making a difference? Like, what do I need to look at in terms of my occupational wellness? So moving over to the physical dimension, that's recognizing the need for physical activity, for diet, sleep, nutrition, supplementation. Like, what do we need to be physically healthy within our lives in order to maintain these other dimensions? And it's a very important dimension in and of itself that can negatively impact the others if not properly addressed. So the next one that we'll go into is the intellectual dimension, which is recognizing creative abilities, finding ways to expand knowledge and skills. And that's really giving us a sense of meaning in terms of what we're consuming on an educational basis. Like, are we developing our skills? Are we being more engaged and seeking out deeper knowledge and meaning and things of that nature? And then the next one, and a very important one, and they're all very important, but environmental wellness. And I think that that dimension sometimes gets put on the back burner in terms of our self-care methods, because this is good health by occupying pleasant, stimulating environments that support our sense of well-being. And sometimes, especially for our clients, they don't have that. They don't have that environment where they feel supported, or they don't have an environment where they can meet their needs on a daily basis. And that can be impactful for treatment as well too. And it can impact the emotional wellness, social wellness, spiritual wellness. It really all has a domino effect in terms of treatment outcomes, daily life, the way we cope with things. So these dimensions of wellness are all very important, and learning to utilize and develop coping strategies within each one of them is very helpful and profound in helping clients and even ourselves reach a certain level of fulfillment and personal wellness, especially when it comes to professionals, in order to maintain what they're doing and not burn themselves out or create that sense of compassion fatigue. So when we're discussing the clients that we work with, or the individuals that we work with relating to these 8 dimensions of wellness, we've seen correlation between the focus on the 8 dimensions of wellness and reinforced coping strategies that really help to sustain an individual's long-term sense of recovery. Because not only are they focusing on the substance use disorder aspect of things and the mental health part that they may be battling with, but also we're giving them the ability to find resources and different coping strategies in all areas of their life, right? So we're really looking at the individual with a holistic, whole person centered approach to their treatment and to their recovery overall. And so for clients who are in the earlier stages of their recovery, being able to focus on treatment planning using these 8 dimensions can really help them to allow them to have the time and space that they need to focus on their treatment. Because I don't know about you, but I'm not very inclined to engage in treatment if I don't have a safe place to live, if I don't have a bed to sleep in, if I don't have food to eat. I'm not going to be as encouraged to be fully present in my recovery process if my other needs are not being met. Right? So incorporating these into the treatment planning process, it can really help us utilize the different resources out there, and it can give us an opportunity to kind of correct some of these areas that will make recovery more sustainable. And so using this holistic approach is really going to allow us to help clients and other individuals feel more secure within their recovery and give proper time, resources, and energy to their own personal goals for treatment. So moving forward, we're going to discuss that each dimension that we talked about previously, but then we're going to talk about like these overlapping subcategories that really kind of pertain to each one. And sometimes they overlap, and just giving a little bit of focus in that in order to provide a context to help people with therapeutic practice and creating those goals and really addressing the areas that are specific to each one. So the first one that we're going to discuss is the emotional considerations for that first dimension of emotional wellness. So when we're discussing this, we're talking about areas of self-regulation and coping. So what is the client doing to really deal with the daily stressors of life? How are they dealing with anger? How are they dealing with anxiety? Do they have proper coping skills in order to get themselves through the day? And then if they're not, really putting an emphasis on that. The next one is self-esteem building. So looking at a client's internal landscape and seeing where there might be some room for improvement. How do they talk to themselves? Do they have a negative mindset, a positive mindset? Like what barriers there in terms of self-esteem might be contributing to the ability to not engage in treatment fully? And so then we have self-acceptance, which is being able to identify with one's past, present, and future, and be able to create goals around that, and to really accept where they are now, help them moving into that transition piece for their sustained recovery. And so next we talk about self-efficacy. So really helping an individual or a client be able to build that sense of self-reliance in order to help other areas in this emotional dimension as well. Because the more self-efficacy that we possess, the better that we're going to be and more enabled that we're going to be in order to have our needs met and feel a sense of positive self-esteem, self-regulation, the ability that we'll have to trust our coping skills and utilize them on a daily basis. And so the next one that we discuss is communication, both intrapersonal and interpersonal. So when it comes to the intrapersonal aspect, that's, like I said before, is how are they talking to themselves? Like how are they self-soothing? How are they being with themselves? How are they treating themselves? And then we look at the interpersonal communication that they're using with relationships in their lives, with their coworkers, things of that nature, and how do we help them manage that? And how are these areas of communication possibly impacting their emotional state? And then the next one is conflict resolution. And this goes closely too with communication, and it's both how are they communicating with people? How are they resolving conflict in their lives? Or do they have the ability to do that? And if they don't possess that ability, it's encouraging them to utilize this area to create a goal in that so that they can address that area and help them with things like self-regulation and coping, self-esteem building, and things of that nature. It all builds upon itself, really. And so moving forward, we're talking about boundary development and maintenance. So looking at a client's history in terms of their boundaries, how are they utilizing them now? Do they have boundaries? Do they know what boundaries are? How can implementing strong personal boundaries help in terms of their emotional wellness, and then incorporating that into the treatment? We're going to look at relationships, both all personal, familial, professional, and romantic. So we're looking at every relationship in a client's life. Like really, what does their milieu look like, right? Like what does it do for them each day on a day-to-day basis? Like how is it impacting them emotionally? And a lot can be said for this because, you know, relationships do encompass a lot of the different dimensions within our lives too. So some of these might be repeated without the other or throughout the other dimensions, but in terms of our emotional wellness, this is a big one. And then moving forward into self-care, we're going to ascertain whether or not clients have any form of self-care that they're providing for themselves. If they're allocating any time to themselves, any time to stress management, any time to emotional wellness, any time to just, you know, blow off some steam, take care of themselves. A lot of times we have probably witnessed clients they have school, they have work, they have kids, they have jobs, they have everything, and they're not really focused on themselves, or they don't know what they want to do or what they like to do. And that can definitely be a negative impact to our day-to-day emotional wellness. So the next one for this is adequate mental health support. So if you really went through this and identified that in terms of the emotional dimension, things seem to be pretty good. There's boundaries, good communication skills, self-esteem is good. But still some issues in that self-regulation and coping and stuff of that nature. And when it comes to emotional wellness, it may very well be an underlying mental health support need that needs to be addressed and encouraged. So that's an opportunity to find resources for that. And so going into the next dimension, when we're talking about the financial dimension of wellness and the financial considerations for each individual, the first one that we're talking about is their day-to-day costs, their expenses. Like, what does that look like? Are they able to sustain themselves? Are they able to buy food? Are they able to pay for things, pay for their rent? Do they have a safe place to live that they can afford? Is it something that is sustainable, really? And helping them identify areas where that can be addressed and amended if necessary. The next part is in budgeting. So allowing our clients and other individuals that we're working with the opportunity to really sit down and think about what it is that I need, what it is that I can do, and really bridge the gap in terms of a daily budget. You know, we talk about daily structure, we talk about our goals and planning and things of that nature, but being able to sit down and budget that stuff too in terms of monetary investment is important, especially if their needs are not already being met and they need that additional support. So this will give you an opportunity to find resources in the community that may aid that or help that in some way. The next part is financial planning. So connecting people with the proper channels in order to plan for the things that they're trying to take care of financially. And then looking at current financial investments for individuals, like where are you putting your money? Where is it going? How is it impacting you? And what can you do to sustain that? What can you do to correct it if necessary or maintain, right? So the next part is future financial goals and investment planning. So looking at their overall goals and what they want to do in terms of their financial wellness, being able to say, like, I have a client that wants to buy a house. Okay, how are we going to get you to that place where you feel secure in doing that and not impacting negatively any of these other dimensions? Like, we can talk about that, we can discuss it, brainstorm it, and then we can keep it on track, right? So the next part, oh, I'm sorry. Let me see if I can go back. My mouse isn't working. I'm going to stop this really quick. Well, I'll just do it this way. So the next part in the financial, we're going to just leave it this way because I don't want to mess with it. But the next part was talking about budgeting, financial planning, and being able to sustain themselves on a month-to-month basis. And then the next one after that was resources. So being able to find proper community resources outside that may help them, whether that's going through MDHHS or providing them with referral. So we will move on to the social considerations. That is going to be really centered around support building and their personal relationships, that ability to involve themselves in the community. And community engagement is so very important, especially in the recovery process. Having that sense of belonging, having that sense of support is really fundamental in the overall recovery process. So the next one that I like to talk about too is interpersonal communication. So how are their day-to-day engagements with other people? How are they interacting with other people? Like what is their style of communication? And this too also goes back to that emotional component that we were talking about in terms of conflict resolution and in terms of just how they're relating to people on a day-to-day basis. And being able to create goals in this area will definitely allow an individual to open up and meet other people, especially if they're on the fence about that is in their early treatment. So support goals. So being able to sit with a client or an individual, sit with them and ask them like, what are your goals for support, and what different groups would you like to engage in? Like if there are multiple pathways that they're interested in for recovery, connecting them with each and every one of those and being supportive of whichever they decide. So giving them the opportunity to identify maybe what they're interested in trying to see what's out there in terms of groups and community support. And then I know we've talked about this before too, but that level of conflict resolution. So when we're talking about the social component is how are they able to manage conflict with other people, and is it going to impact them negatively? So really putting a focus on that. And then we go also back into boundaries with social connections and social interactions, and being able to not only have self boundaries, but boundaries externally for other people and what that means for us in maintaining that, right? And then the last one for social consideration is that aspect of volunteering, which can be really helpful and beneficial for clients in the beginning stages too, as an opportunity to give back, to meet people, to connect, to build that support network, and to really identify with what gives them a sense of fulfillment. All right. All right, and then moving down into the spiritual considerations. This is going to be the area where we're looking to find purpose, to really ascertain what it is that gives us that motivation, and help us associate meaning with life's events, right? So for some people, this might be a difficult area to kind of tackle when you're going through the dimensions of wellness. Because some people don't have religious beliefs, or culturally they don't really have a spiritual belief, or vice versa, whichever that looks like. And so this is really just helping them identify what it is that's that main motivating factor that can help them to sustain. And then we're going into gaining a sense of personal fulfillment and identification of personal priorities. So finding that aspect or that thing that makes you feel like you have a level of passion, drive, motivation, fulfillment. This can also help you to identify kind of what it is that you're looking to do in the future, and what it is that you're looking to gain or to help other people with, and that will help you to ascertain your priorities more effectively. So also giving clients the opportunity to really look at their values, morals, and beliefs, and see where they might be creating barriers for themselves in terms of their treatment, in terms of their recovery process, and in terms of just their day-to-day lives. Like, what does that look like? And it might be mindset, it might be cultural, and just really getting into that and being able to have an open discussion about that is something that can be very beneficial. Also talk about religion, possibly what religious practices are maybe inspiring to that person, what they might be interested in, and just being an open avenue for growth and expansion in that area if it's something that the client is interested in. Really, it's just being supportive of that and helping to find resource. And so daily religious and spiritual practices, this is also an important one, especially if clients do have a specific religious background or a spiritual practice that they engage in day-to-day basis. And this is being supportive of that, listening to understand and learn and help them engage in that more effectively. Like if there's an area of that they would like to get into, but have no knowledge of or information on, you can help them to kind of create a goal around that as well. And so community support and involvement in terms of religious practices and spiritual practices are also important, and connecting them with the proper channels in order to meet the goals that they have for their spiritual development. And then allowing clients to practice gratitude, helping them to kind of reshape their thought pattern and be able to appreciate what they do have and things of that nature. We know that gratitude can rewire the brain, and so helping them get into that space of showing gratitude and finding that sense of life fulfillment. And then the next one is awareness building. So self-awareness, the spiritual component of this can allow a person to help build that sense of self-awareness, which can also impact the other dimensions. And then moving forward, we're going to talk about the occupational dimension. So that's the occupational considerations for this dimension in terms of job searching, reinforcing a skill set. That's being able to connect clients with different avenues for what they're looking to accomplish. Like we have a ton of resources available to clients in order to help them get GEDs, to find trainings, to get it back into school if that's something that they're interested in. And so being an open outlet for that and being able to talk about that and set a goal around that is important. And then developing professional meaning and integrity. So being able to develop professionally and build that sense of self-integrity, that's something that can also help with the social aspect and with the emotional aspect, especially in building that sense of self-efficacy that we've talked about. And so moving forward, talking about ethical considerations. So really being able to sit with the client and identify their set of personal ethics, and then how that intermingles with their workforce and how that intermingles with their cultural considerations and things of that nature. So having those discussions about ethics is important too. And it also is key in helping to build that sense of self-awareness and identify beliefs and things of that nature. Moving into developing self-satisfaction and enrichment. So having that sense of occupational wellness is going to help us to feel like we have a purpose, we have a meaning, we have something that we're doing that feels fulfilling. And so being able to create goals around that is also something that can be really helpful for this area. Included in this also is project management and stress management. So when someone does have a really important deadline, or when someone does have a lot of work that they have to do, is being able to talk with them, have an open discussion about how they plan on managing the demands of the project, or how they plan on meeting their needs and reducing that level of stress so that they can cope. So really, when we're talking about this too, it's building an additional coping skill for stress management. The next one is scheduling and daily structure. So this too can aid in stress management, is really getting down to what the time that you have during the day, making sure that you're sticking to a daily schedule and allowing yourself the time that you need in order to get everything done. This will help them as well, especially when it comes to their treatment obligations. So being able to have an open discussion about that can be helpful for a positive outcome, especially in attendance purposes. So, and like I said, stress management is really important with this one as well. So the next one is recognition of accomplishments. So a lot of times start working, we don't give ourselves the opportunity to sit with ourselves and say, hey, like I've done this, I'm doing really well. It's giving clients an opportunity to really voice that and to show where they were and where they've come, and all the progress that they've made. So this too, in terms of the occupational wellness, and finding that integrity, that meaning, that sense of purpose, is another one to really consider. All right. And so moving forward into the physical considerations, we're going to be discussing nutrition. If they have adequate access to food, if they have access to supplements, if they have access to education on foods and how that impacts their neurobiology in terms of their substance use disorder. And really pushing home the idea of taking care of that physical aspect in terms of movement, exercise, whatever it is that they're capable of doing, breathing exercises, which can also reduce stress, and then making sure they have adequate like healthcare, and their doctor, their PCP is openly available to them. So making sure they have the proper channels for engaging in treatment with a clinician or a doctor. And then also ascertaining whether or not they have access to hygiene and self-care items that they're going to need to live their daily lives. That's also important. And there are resources for that too. So if you don't have a goal to create around that, it's being able to connect them with the proper resources out in the community. And then next, the last one for this that I like to talk about is harm reduction. So that's maybe they're not ready to make a specific movement into changing a behavior, but we can always discuss reducing harm to the person. So if they're overeating or they're under eating, it's creating a very specific attainable goal that they can use to just reduce harm. And I think that that can be said too for a lot of these dimensions as well. So moving forward into the intellectual considerations for the intellectual dimension, this is where we're talking about skills and competency development, educational goals and aspirations. So do they want to go to school? Do they have access to trainings? What are their goals for professional development? And how can we connect you with those resources? And how can we get you to a place where you're creating a goal to achieve them? Looking at mentally stimulating activities and what that does for our need for self-care, and being able to engage in those, like what can we do to get you to engage in those kinds of activities? Maintaining daily balance and structure. And that also goes back to what we've talked to previously that can help with our overall sense of wellness and stress management, is finding that structure. Talk about the consideration of self-discipline. So this is giving ourselves the, or developing the skill to self-regulate as well in terms of our actions, our emotions, our planning, things of that nature. So really having a frank discussion about that and what we're capable of, what a client is capable of. And then studying. So being able to have the proper tools to do that, being able to have the resources needed to do that, and what that looks like for them, talking about different learning styles and things of that nature. So whatever might be a barrier in this area of intellectual wellness, is seeing what that looks like and maybe coming up with a plan of action to change that pattern. And then we have educational resources and tools. Like we said before, in the community, we have access to GED, trainings, development, professional competency. So it's really just looking out in the community and connecting them with the proper resources and tools that they're going to need to be successful once they've created a goal in this dimension. And then we move into creativity. And I think this one is really important. They're all important, but this one's very important in terms of self-care practice as well. So giving yourself an outlet to be able to find some time to be creative, whether that's writing or drawing or singing or speaking or music or whatever that looks like for each individual, is really allocating some time for that and developing that kind of competency. And then we have development of critical thinking skills. So Developing these critical thinking skills is going to allow clients to also better create goals, build that sense of awareness, both personally and professionally. And so with this one, you can really see how this would overlap into a lot of those other dimensions. All right, and so the last one that we're talking about here is the environmental considerations, which is our cultural implications, socioeconomic implications, and living arrangements. So what does a client's exterior environment really look like? Who are they with on a day-to-day basis? What does the actual place of residence look like? Are socioeconomic implications impacting their ability to find a safe environment? Are their living arrangements considered safe or supportive? And really coming up with some goals around that, especially if that is an area where they have the most trouble in. And then it's looking at housing needs, challenges, and focusing on those goals. So what does a client need in terms of their housing? What do they need in terms of the challenges that they face on a day-to-day basis? And then once again, talking about daily structure, but in relation to environmental wellness. So if they're isolated and stuck inside of a house all day, how are we going to change that to make them more engaged in their own environment, which is going to give them a better sense of fulfillment? And then daily relational exchanges, which goes back into that social aspect and goes back to that emotional aspect of who are you around on a day-to-day basis? What does that look like? Is that impacting any of the other dimensions? And so really giving that a good focus and seeing where that can be improved as well. And then we have daily resource management, which can also help with the financial aspect. And it's looking at what you have available, what you may need to sustain yourself, and how that impacts your environment. And then daily activities that impact other dimensions, right? So these are environmental activities that may impact our social interactions, our emotional wellness, things of that nature. So like transportation, work, home, scheduling, and their daily routine. And then we're going to look at organization of space, right? So making sure that the interior of the actual place that they're in is supported for them and they have what they need, and that things are how they need them to be in order to be successful and maintain a daily structure and daily routine, right? So there are a lot more considerations to that we could list under each one, but these are pretty important ones to factor into each dimension. And so that is going to be able to help you to kind of ascertain some goals for each area that you can put into their active treatment. And so I kind of want to change gears now that we've talked about that and move into self-care for clinicians and professionals, because I feel like this is a very important area that should be discussed a lot, right? In terms of self-care practices, in terms of the work that we do as professionals, making sure that we are preventing burnout, that we ourselves are being accountable, that we are practicing what we preach, so to speak, and that we're really giving ourselves the opportunity to find that level of self-awareness, that we're giving ourselves the opportunity to find that sense of balance and well-being. And so why is it important? Personal and professional integrity, right? So walking the walk and talking the talk, doing what we say, what we ask other people to do, and doing the same thing for ourselves, right? And so taking a closer look at each of the dimensions that we would like to address in our own selves. So if we have a pretty stable environment, we have a good financial component, like everything seems pretty good, but where are you lacking in which dimension? Maybe you have a lack in that social dimension. Maybe you're not giving yourself enough goal focus in the occupational dimension or the educational one. So whatever that looks like for you. And then through self-care practice, it enables us to work more effectively. It gives us the tools and the coping skills that we can also share with other people. And it gives us that really valuable skill set that we can pass on to others. And we strengthen our own personal and professional well-being in the process. And so the next thing that we're going to kind of go over at the very end here is a dimensional inventory, and that's breaking down these different dimensions into SMART goals, right? So, and then taking time to put that into action, and that's for ourselves. So looking at the dimensional inventory worksheet that I'm going to provide, you're going to really just ascertain your goals in each area and taking a closer look, determining that on a scale of 1 to 8. So with the highest priority dimension being a 1, and then the lowest one for you being an 8. And after determining that priority, that's when you can start to make those SMART goals for each dimension. And so I do believe that is the end of this. And I would like to share with you the dimensional inventory. And you can really work with this as much as you want, or you can create your own. This is just a baseline. And it's going into, like, this is a mock-up right here of if somebody were to ascertain their need in each dimension. So it's determining on that scale of 1 to 8, your dimensional priorities. And so for this one, it has emotional as a priority number 1. And when we're doing this exercise, it's important to remember too that these aren't the dimensions that you have the best outcomes in so far. It's not, oh, I'm doing great in my emotional wellness, so that's a 1. It's where do you need the most work? Where have you been kind of neglecting a dimensional area the most? And so for this one, it is emotional. That is the one that needs the most work, with the second one being social, and then moving down into spiritual as the third one, right? And so after that, you can kind of start to make goals that are timely. So you do your own right here. And then down here is creating that SMART goal for each dimension. So for this one, it was that sense of emotional well-being and support. So you would create a SMART goal for that dimension, right? And then go down the list from 1 to 8, making sure that they're time sensitive, they're attainable, and that they're realistic is important as well too. And then with each one of those, we go into this action stage, which is taking that first one that we looked at a few minutes ago and saying, okay, so for my emotional wellness, I've created a goal. And now for the goal itself, 3 actions that I'm going to take in order to meet that goal within the time that I've given myself within that goal. And then being able to look at this from time to time, see where you've enhanced things, see where you've improved. I've actually used this with several clients of mine, and they really enjoy it, and it gives them a very in-depth look at where their priorities are. And they've also been able to identify some areas where they didn't realize they needed additional support, but have found it. And so it has been a very helpful tool in helping them to ascertain their needs and help them really just focus on their recovery. So that is the end of my PowerPoint presentation. I would like to give us some time to answer questions. We have about 15 minutes left. If anybody has any questions.
Yeah, so we have one here in the chat so far, and then please everyone just, put whatever questions you might still have as we wrap up here in that chat box, and we'll get those over to Sarah. A couple of people have asked, are we going to make the copies of the slides and that handout available? Yes, we will email that out to all of the attendees that are on the webinar today. The question we have so far in the chat is, can you elaborate more on cultural implications?
Cultural implications in terms of each one of the dimensions, or when we were talking about like the financial aspect? Because it kind of varies in terms of which dimension you're looking at. But when we talk about cultural implications, it's demographic information. Like, do they have are there cultural disparities preventing them from access to healthcare, preventing them from financial wellness, really? Like, do they have issues in that area that they need to work on? Let's see. I'm trying to read the chat too. Self-care intervention sheet. Yeah, all of the material will be available to you guys as well too, so you can reread over it. But we also, when we're talking about that cultural aspect too, and it's especially in the spiritual dimension, it's really taking a look at, are they going to be open to discussions about those things due to their cultural beliefs and things of that nature. So it's really letting them lead you into the conversation in terms of that too. And not pushing an agenda or anything like that. It's just being open and allowing them to provide you with the information so they can create their own goal. Really, you're just helping in terms of just sorting it out.
So in addition to that resource sheet, are there other workbooks or things that you've used in your practice for people who are looking to kind of dig a little deeper into using these 8 dimensions?
I do, like, I use a motivational interviewing book that has helped me in terms of different materials. Not really so much. I know that for my background in peer recovery support, we are really closely associated with the 8 dimensions of wellness and building coping skills in each one of those. And that's really we're focused on that. And so I kind of just moved that over into parts of my clinical experience, saying that I'm noticing this barrier where clients aren't as able to engage in treatment if they don't have sustainable place to live, if they don't have access to transportation, if they can't even find food to eat on a daily basis. So, all right, we're going to take a look at these areas, see what we can do while still focusing on that treatment component of substance use disorder. So what can we do to get you where you need to be, which is over here, engaging in treatment? Because like I said earlier, like I'm less inclined to engage in treatment if I can't get any of my other needs met. And that's just the way it is, you know, like I can't get to group, I don't have transportation. I can't take the bus because I don't have enough money. Like I didn't even get any sleep last night because I don't have a place to stay. So let's focus on some of these areas and engage in treatment as well. So it's really taking that holistic approach to the person. It's not just their substance use disorder. It is all of them. It is everything that they need in order to be successful. And that's what's helped me. And I've seen it work for other people, is being able to just focus on that whole person aspect of everything.
Yeah, and you kind of answered part of my next question, but something that we've asked a lot of our presenters throughout this series, especially those of you who are in the field day to day working with this population, are there resources or things that you have found that people need that are things that maybe we're not thinking of? So you talked a little bit about transportation, childcare. Are there other barriers, resources, things that as professionals or just the general community who wants to help, things that we're missing?
Things that we're missing. I do want to reiterate that access to childcare, that has been a huge barrier for a lot of people, is having the means to provide childcare. But also I think in terms of the LGBTQIA plus community, being able to provide them with trauma-informed and trauma-based treatment in order for them to feel more comfortable, things of that nature. Here at Odyssey, we really try to provide a really safe environment, but elsewhere in the general public, like it does become a barrier for them to seek treatment and to stay in treatment. And so that's something that I like to really focus on and make sure that we're staying trauma informed. So I think more education on that would be helpful. Like that might be something that we're missing. Is just really driving that home to be more culturally inclusive, more sensitive, and that trauma focus too. Absolutely.
All right. Thanks so much. So that seems to be all of our questions that we have in the chat. So we can, if there are more questions after the fact, we can definitely get them connected to you, because that was some really fantastic information. I just want to thank you for your time and your expertise today. And thanks to everyone for attending this session. Today's presentation is one of many webinars scheduled throughout the month of September. You can still register for upcoming presentations at sccmh.org. At the conclusion of this session today, a pop-up will appear on your screen with a survey. please take a moment to fill this out and give your feedback, especially to those of you who registered for continuing ed credits. And thanks again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.